Hello, my name is Christine, and I'll be discussing Margaret Atwood's novel, The Handmaid's Tale. Let's start off with a brief biography. Margaret Atwood was born in 1939 in Ottawa, Ontario, Canada. She's a novelist and a literary critic. Her father was a zoology professor, and her mother was a dietitian and nutritionist. As a child, Atwood spent half of each year in the woods in northern Ontario and Quebec, helping her father with his research. Atwood and her brother were homeschooled by their mother and grew up as best friends. They would read and play children's games together. An interesting fact is that during these children's games, they didn't have an issue with taking on a role of a different gender. Atwood would play the part that had typically male characteristics and her brother female characteristics. Growing up, Atwood had unconventional role models in her parents. Her father shared the domestic chores with her mother, and her mother easily adapted to the demands of living in the woods, replacing her skirts with slacks and acting out her conviction that women could do what men did. At 16 years old, Atwood knew she wanted to become a writer and became serious about it while she was a student at the University of Toronto. In 1961, she self-published her first book of poetry, Double Persephone, which she received the E.J. Pratt Medal for Poetry. And in 1969, she published her first novel, The Edible Woman. Moving on to one of her more popular novels and one of this week's readings, The Handmaid's Tale was written in 1984 and published the following year. It has garnered 2 awards, the Governor General's Award in 1986 and the Arthur C. Clarke's Award in 1987. The novel was also nominated for the Booker Prize, Nebula Award, and the Prometheus Award for Best Novel. Atwood's novel has also seen many adaptations. A 1990 film with Robert Duvall, Faye Dunaway, and the late Natasha Richardson. A radio dramatization for BBC Radio 4 in 2000 and CBC Radio in 2002. An operatic adaptation in 2000, a ballet stage adaptation in 2013 for the Royal Winnipeg Ballet, and one of the more popular adaptations is Hulu's drama series in 2017 with Elizabeth Moss and Alexis Bledel. Fun fact, Hulu's adaptation has earned 13 Emmy nominations and 8 wins, including Outstanding Drama Series, Leading Actress, Supporting Actress for Directing, Writing, Guest Actress, Production Design, and Cinematography for a single camera series. Because of the nature of Atwood's novel, it has also seen many challenges across the United States, beginning in 1990 and as recent as this year, given the debut of Hulu's adaptation. The Handmaid's Tale has been challenged in California, Iowa, Massachusetts, Washington State, Florida, Pennsylvania, Texas, and North Carolina. The novel has been challenged because people believed it was too explicit for children. It contained profanity, lurid passages about sex, and statements defamatory to minorities, God, women, and the disabled. The book was considered poor quality literature and stressed suicide, violence, and hopelessness. It was downgraded from required to optional on the summer reading list for 11th graders due to age-inappropriate subject matter. An interesting case happened in the Judson School District in Texas. The superintendent banned The Handmaid's Tale because it was sexually explicit and offensive to Christians. However, it was overruled by the school board. Just reading Robert Doyle's banned books list of challenges on The Handmaid's Tale made me even more intrigued to read Atwood's novel. Moving on, in the first 11 chapters, we learn that the characters inhabit a society that attempts to return to traditional values, eventually recognized as a totalitarian theocracy. Atwood's society is known as the Republic of Gilead. In Gilead, the characters are stripped of their identities from the time before, and are given new roles or classes such as the commander, commander's wife, the eye, which is in relevance to God's eye, a guardian, an aunt, a Martha, and the namesake of the novel, a handmaid. Offred, the narrator, and also a handmaid, describes in detail the environment around her, from the room where she stays, specifically emphasizing that it is not her room. She does not own anything. To the people surrounding her, like the commander's wife, the Marthas, the aunts, and her fellow handmaids, to buildings that she recognized from the time before and now used for completely different activities. Offred tells us of her time at the gymnasium, her interactions with the household in her current post, and her handmaid companion. She also shares with us one of her routines, which is going to the market and visiting the wall. She also shares with us one of the more unsettling scenes so far, the visit to the doctor. Just reading the first 11 chapters, or rather the first 61 pages of the book, I was infuriated at how regressed the women's roles and rights were in Gilead. I first came across The Handmaid's Tale in a bookstore, and after reading the synopsis, it automatically screamed dystopia. After taking a course on utopian literature, I was fascinated by the genre, but also more hesitant to study it academically. The idea and word utopia was coined by Thomas More's novel Utopia, which primarily depicts a fictional island society and its religious, social, and political customs. To most, these customs would appear ideal. In Fatima Vieira's essay, The Concept of Utopia, she defines utopia as a better place or time, a portrait of a happy society. In Gregory Clay's essay, The Origins of Dystopia, Wells, Huxley, and Orwell, he says that utopia is an improved and reachable society. Consequently, Clays defines dystopia as a fictional portrayal of a society in which evil or negative social and political developments have the upper hand. After reading Clay's essay, one quote stood out and is completely applicable to The Handmaid's Tale. He says, "In the wake of totalitarianism, it was also suggested that the utopian impulse was itself inherently dystopian. That is to say, the desire to create a much improved society in which human behavior was dramatically superior to the norm implies an intrinsic drift towards punitive methods of controlling behavior, which inexorably results in some form of police state." To reiterate, Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale in 1984. This year was the tail end of the second wave of feminism. By this time, women had seen major improvements in their access to higher education and the professions, in employment equity, in access to legal abortion, and in divorce law. However, during Ronald Reagan's presidency, women's rights declined. Women made up an increasing percentage of those in the lowest paid occupations. The number of elected and politically appointed women declined. Murders related to sexual assault and domestic violence increased by 160%, while the overall murder rate declined. Meanwhile, the federal government defeated bills to fund shelters for battered women, stalled already approved funding, and in 1981 closed down the Office of Domestic Violence, which was only opened 2 years earlier. Pronatalists, those who support high birth rates, bombed and set fire to abortion clinics and harassed their staff and patients. Medicaid stopped funding for legal abortions, which effectively eliminated the freedom of choice for most teenage girls and poor women. Moreover, several states passed laws making abortion illegal and went as far as restricting information about abortion. Also, by 1984, the American New Right had metamorphosed into Jerry Falwell's moral majority. Televangelists, who were evangelical preachers that appeared on televisions to preach and appeal for funds, told their congregations that feminists encouraged women to leave their husbands, kill their children, practice witchcraft, destroy capitalism, become lesbians, and that AIDS was divine retribution for the sin of homosexuality. One of the right-wing wives made a great living telling women to return to the household, let their husbands provide, and to use their femininity and feminine wiles as the core of their success and fulfillment as women. Moving on to the happenings around the world regarding women and their rights, in Iran, Ayatollah Khomeini had forced women out of the universities, their jobs, and back to their burqas and their homes. In Afghanistan, a radically feminist position was thinking it was okay for women to read and write. In Romania, women were monitored monthly for pregnancy. Birth control and abortion were outlawed, and women's wages were linked to childbearing. In the first 11 chapters of The Handmaid's Tale, women were oppressed by limiting or eliminating their social interactions and languages, intelligence, bodies, and identities. Right from the first page of the novel, Atwood presents a society in which the women, whom we later learn are handmaids, are not allowed to talk to other people. If only we could talk to them. We learned to whisper almost without sound. At the gymnasium where the handmaids are brainwashed or re-educated, The narrator of the book shares that they weren't allowed out, except for their walks, twice daily, 2 by 2. Aside from being prohibited from interaction or speaking to each other, the guards, or the aunts at the gymnasium, they are also not allowed to speak to the Marthas and vice versa, unless it is in regards to the commander or the commander's wife. In Chapter 2, Offred says, the Marthas are not supposed to fraternize with us. Even with their little to no interactions with each other, the handmaids are given approved or accepted greetings and responses. Atwood's text explicitly says the accepted greeting among us is. We first see this when Offred meets up with Ofglin to go to the market. Ofglin says, "Blessed be the fruit," and Offred responds, "May the Lord be open." Even as they separate and go to their posts, they both say, "Under his eye." This reminds me of George Orwell's novel, 1984, with Big Brother. People were controlled by fear of being caught by Big Brother, just as the handmaids are afraid of being caught by the eye. Just by examining this one aspect of control, we can see the handmaids being isolated from this new society. Contributing to the handmaids' isolation and oppression, their intelligence is also being restricted. In the Republic of Gilead, reading and writing are no longer legal. When Offred and Ofglin go to the market, Offred shares with us that words were being eliminated and tells us of one instance with the store Lilies of the Field. Offred says, "You can see the place under the lily, where the lettering was painted out, when they decided that even the names of shops were too much temptation for us. Now, places are known by their signs alone." Further in Chapter 7, Offred questions whether or not she is telling the story. She emphasizes the word tell because she does not have another option, as she does not have anything to write with, and writing is forbidden. What is more appalling is how the handmaids do not have control of their own bodies. Their bodies are governed by the people with power in the Republic of Gilead. The handmaid's primary, if not only task in Gilead, is to bear children for the commander and his barren wife. Being the only fertile women in this new society, they are burdened with the responsibility of procreating for Gilead. In the hushed manner in which the handmaid's service is discussed, one can see how others view their service. One of the Marthas said, "I wouldn't debase myself like that." To which the other Martha responded saying, "If I hadn't have got my tubes tied, that could have been me. It's not what you call hard work." As part of the service, the handmaids are subjected to physical exams with a female doctor to ensure that they are healthy and able to procreate. In summation of the lack of autonomy the handmaids have over their lives, they lose their sense of self or identity. They are subjugated to many factors that 21st century American women luxuriate in, such as the freedom to speak their minds without fear of punishment, partaking in social interactions, building their intelligence with reading and writing, and the freedom to make choices regarding their bodies. By removing these rights or privileges, the handmaids are not women, they are not humans, they are properties of the Republic of Gilead. The handmaids do not even retain their names from the time before, or between their posts at a commander's house. Their names are composed of a man's first name and a prefix denoting belonging to. For example, the central character's current name is Offred, meaning of Fred. In her introduction to the novel, Atwood says, within this name is concealed another possibility, offered, denoting a religious offering or a victim offered for sacrifice. Aside from the simple yet complex idea of a name for the handmaids, in this new society, everything from the time before is discarded. Their identities or roles they held in the time before are stripped or erased as if they never existed. Offred speaks of her family life before Gilead. She was a wife to Luke and a mother to her daughter. Since the rise of the Republic of Gilead, Offred has not seen or heard of either her husband or daughter. Is the Republic of Gilead a society in which you would want to live in? I wouldn't. Although with Donald Trump as our President of the United States, his administration, and their goal to repeal a mandate made under the Obama administration, which gives access to free birth control, it seems as if instead of progressing with women's rights in the US, we are regressing. Also, the violence that seems to be happening weekly, if not daily, across our nation exhibit hatred towards differing religions and races. Margaret Atwood wrote The Handmaid's Tale in 1984, during the second wave of feminism. She questioned women's rights that 2017 American women exercised freely, but were fought for by the women that came before them. By focusing on the first 11 chapters of The Handmaid's Tale, it is evident that Atwood's handmaids are not women we identify with, but rather sympathize for. It is a startling society to imagine, and more so that it feels like a realistic future that America is heading towards. Speaking of which, in an interview, Atwood says there's nothing in the book that hasn't already happened. All the things described in the book, people have already done to one another. Thank you for viewing my presentation, and I hope you have a better weekend than those in the Republic of Gilead.